This video will step you through the basic concepts of Python by teaching you to write your first lines of code. Welcome to Chapter 1, our basic concepts of Python. And the best way to play with those worksheets is to learn interactively. While we're doing this, in order to do so, make sure you see on your upper right the trusted field. If it is not trusted, click on it and approve it. The next thing that I recommend doing is if you go above the tutorial kernel and do a restart, clear all output. That makes that entire thing really interactive, that you see what happens while we're doing it. Yes, restart and clear. This removed all the output. At this point, we can go and work on our notebooks. You see the active cell in the notebook is marked here in color. If you click on it, you can actually work interactively with it. Just to give you a quick hint, I double click on it. It is just everything editable. It's just normal text. It's formatted a little bit. And in order to activate a cell, we press in the cell Shift Return, and it performs the either program or the formatting. I'm going here through the basic concepts only. This is not a comprehensive discussion of all the functionalities that we have in Python. Python is a very mature language, so I highly recommend you go with me through the Quickstart, but don't skip it. There's here a link to the full Python tutorial. That's where you find so much more detail, much more than I can actually cover here. Let me quickly jump to this tutorial, show you the Python tutorial. That's the standard Python documentation. And as you look into their outline, it's way more comprehensive, way more detailed than what I'm covering. But, and that's a good thing, if you ever need help on Python, you go to Professor Google, type whatever you're looking for, and most likely you will find a link to the Python tutorial. There's one trick that I want to give you here right away. We are beginners. Where do beginners start? With chapter 1. So if you go on Google and you get answers, and one answer says, this is the detail on this on chapter 15, and the other one says, this is an answer in chapter 3. Don't go to chapter 15 because it assumes that you already mastered chapter 3. I see this again and again in my courses here at the University of Washington, that people take the shortcut, jump to the advanced features, but if you don't know the fundamentals, they are not very helpful because you may not even understand the discussion. So again, highly recommended the Python tutorial. For me, this will be right away something that should be in my bookmarks. It's a page or a site that I use very frequently. Let's get back to our simple programming intro. The first thing that every programming tutorial does is get your program to say hello world. Why are we doing this? Because we want to see if our installation works. Yeah. So in Python, to get the code to say hello world, we use the print command. Print simply says whatever you give me, in this case, whatever text or string you give me, display it. Let's do this. I go in the cell, Shift Enter, and you see it printed the text that I gave it here, hello world. How is a command in Python organized? It is a command or a function. A function gets an argument. The argument here is the string, and the argument is given within parentheses. So syntax, command name, open parentheses, one or more argument, and close parentheses. That wasn't all that hard, isn't it? If you want to play a little bit and try something else, if you're here, you can use escape B on the Mac to get another cell. And I think the command key on Windows should be the Alt or the Control B to enter a cell. Or you can go up here and use the plus. If you're not completely sure, you can always go into Help. That gives you extra information how to run things. Or on the side of the cell, you find here a shortcut list for all the options that you can use within that notebook. So at this point, I just want to go back and say, I added one more line, and I want to show you one thing. I go copy, paste the command in here, but different programming languages have different ways of telling you what's a string. Python allows us to use both the double quotes and the single quotes to define a string, and you see it works the same way. This is not true for MATLAB, that's not true for Fortran or C, C++. So that's a nice little help thing. And you've seen how we can interactively just play with this. So next, let's look, how do we define variables? Because that's really what we need for programming. And I want to start here with a simple example. Compute the circumference of a circle. So I take the shortcut, I define a variable pi and 3.14, and if you want to keep going, 1279, whatever that keeps going here. However accurate you want to do it. Hey, just the next line, I define a radius 10.5, and I do my computations. The circumference is 2 times radius times pi. So this is a mini program. I can execute it, and let's see what happens. When I executed it, it seemed nothing happened, and that's not true. It defined those variables, but we never told it to show it to us. So these variables live in memory. There are simple ways to look at it. The quick and dirty one is if you didn't just put in the variable name and execute it, it will show you the content of the variable. That works for simple data types, but not for everything. The clean and pretty way of doing this is to use the print command. If you go to print, the variable circumference, in this case, it looks pretty much the same thing. Sometimes it's not that simple, or it's not that same. And if you want to write a report, you don't want to just a number. You say, if you're programming, why not just right away do a little bit nicer? So let's look. I have here a print command that looks a bit messy, where I print my variables, radius and circumference CU. Let's first execute it. I get the text, the output, 2 times 10.5 times pi is equal to the 65.966 something. Let's look how that worked. This is actually the string that I am printing. I am printing a string, let's zoom in here, that says 2 times something. The something is in our braces, curly brackets here. 2 times something times pi equals to something. These curly brackets here are placeholders. I have here my first placeholder, and I have my second placeholder. The string itself, this is the string within the quotes, has what we call methods to operate on a string. We call a method by taking the object, that's the string, period. The dot or the period says, now pick a method. The method is called format using this template string. And we give it variables, a list of variables, the radius and the circumference. The first argument goes in the first placeholder. The second argument goes in the second placeholder. And so I had a nice print. If I want to do this and change the values, then I get an updated nice print. So what's important here is that you may be used for MATLAB. To silence MATLAB, you put a semicolon at the end. You will see when you work with C and C++ next week that these commands need a line termination. That's typically the semicolon. And if you look at Python, it didn't need any of this. So it's actually pretty easy at that point, just like a pocket calculator. Let's look a little bit further into this. And that is the structure. How do we structure a code? It's always recommended to make a structure nice, grouped with indentation, what goes within a group. Most programming languages suggest that, but the user is always capable of making a very unreadable, very chaotic code. Python, the designers of Python actually had a smart idea and say, how about we force a nice looking style as a necessity for reading a structure? And I can only tell you, most Python beginners write much prettier code than with most other languages they just learn. And the main reason why works this way. I showed it here in the example of defining a very simple function. That function defines a function factor that takes one argument. The end of the definition is a period. So now what goes into this function? Some languages do a begin and an end. Some languages put parentheses, curly brackets, whatever in there. Python says anything that goes in there starts with an indentation. Everything that has that indentation is part of that function definition. If I go back out of that indentation, that's the end of that group. So this function, we think that this is the body of the function. The function itself, I'm using here conditions. Here's an if condition that says, if my argument is greater than 1, the period is necessary to say that's the start of the if group, the condition. We do an additional indentation. Here, my indentation includes a comment, so this is just helping us. The next line has the same indentation. That means this group belongs together. This is the body that's executed if that if condition is true. And there could be more lines than this. From here, my indentation got shorter. That means this else is in the same line with the if. These two belong together, and it ended that group. The else also starts a group. I have that period here. And I have 2 lines with the same indentation. That is my answer. After that, I jump back. The return has the same indentation as the else, but after the else, the end group, that ends the condition. So that's a new statement and says, hello function, return this answer to the user. That's just the definition. So this idea of the indentation helps us to structure the code. Let's just try it. I execute it. It didn't seem to do thing. Why? Because it only defines the function. It didn't execute the function. But let's now try. This is actually computing the factorial of a number. So let's try and compute the factorial of 5. We just defined the function factor, and this executed the function. Factorial of 5 is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, which is 120. That shouldn't have been too complicated. So main message here is, and I forgot to format this, main message here is use these indentations to structure your code. There's no need for brackets, start and end. It's just write it so it's nice and readable. If you get the wrong indentation, you will get an error message in Python, and it will point out that something is out of alignment, and just check that.